Hello all, Old Geek here, and in this video I'm going to be taking a look at the magic system used in Middle-earth role-playing, MERP for short. When people are critical of the MERP system, that criticism usually centres around its use of magic and how it doesn't feel much like Tolkien, usually claiming that there's far too much of it. Are these criticisms deserved? Are the problems innate with the system or how it is presented, especially in the game's source materials? Let's find out. Well, firstly, let's look at how magic works in the game. As MERP is a stripped-down version of Rolemaster, thus it inherited its big brother's magic system, utilising spell lists and power points. An individual's power points are defined by their stats, namely intelligence and intuition. And points are consumed with each casting of a spell, the amount being dependent on the level of the spell being cast. Magic items can modify someone's power point total, these coming in the form of spell adders and spell multipliers, items that either add to or multiply a power point pool. Thus, if a character has 2 spell points and finds an item which is described as being a +1 spell adder, that individual will now have 3 spell points per day. There are 2 fields of magic in MERP: essence and channeling. For those thinking in typical D&D terms, essence resembles arcane magic, and it's the field typically of mages and bards. Characters utilising the essence draw their power points from their intelligence stat. This is the prime stat for mages, but only the second or third stat for most bards. Thus, bards are likely to have fewer power points at their disposal. Essence spells also cannot be cast by any individual who is wearing armour. They must be completely unarmoured. Channeling resembles divine and druidic magic from D&D. The classes that focus on these spells are animists, which are a cleric druid hybrid, and rangers, and their power points are drawn from their intuition stat. As with the bard, the ranger will likely have fewer power points than the animist due to other stat requirements. There is also a limitation placed on spellcasting in armour using channeling, but this one is that channeling casters cannot use metal armour, but the caster can wear leather. The armour restrictions are not quite as catastrophic as people who are mostly familiar with D&D might imagine. An unarmoured individual typically is quite hard to hit on most of the weapon attack tables, but they are likely to suffer more when they are hit. And rigid leather against most attack types is a pretty effective choice. Soft leather, on the other hand, is abysmal. As mentioned earlier, the spells are organised into lists. When characters are created, and if or when they gain experience levels, they have the option to put development points into learning spell lists. Each point is worth 20%. Thus, if they put 5 points into spell lists, they learn 100%. Usually this means learning 1 list. Though, for example, if a character has 40 points left over from a previous level, they might put 60 now to learn that list, and then they've got a 40% chance of learning another list. They cannot split it up 5 20s and try and learn 5 lists at a time. You've got to hit that 100 before you can use the excess points on another list. In addition, when characters are first created, they get additional chances for spell lists due to their race and possibly their use of background points. The racial role is typically a low percentage chance though. Only elves have a half decent chance of getting a racial spell list. Most humans it's less than 5%. But it is possible through this for characters of any class to begin knowing a spell list. Even scouts and warriors, though it is highly unlikely. Mages and animists get 5 points towards spell lists at first level, and 5 more at each subsequent level. This ensures that they start with at least one list, and gain a new list each level. There are some times that it can fall completely out of sync if they choose to shift points around, because development points can be moved between categories, but most of the time it'll be one list per level. Bards get 2 points towards their spell lists, thus 40%, and rangers get 1 point, thus 20%. This makes bards and rangers acquire their spell lists a lot more slowly on average, unless the dice are on their side. Now in MERP, characters have a level limit of level 10. The game does not go beyond level 10. You need to go to Rolemaster if you want to go beyond there. But in my experience, most games are played at lower level. Thus, in the MERP system, each spell list contains spells for those possible levels of 1 through to 10. Level 1 spells are rather weak. But as is the norm with role-playing games, they do tend to get more powerful with each level on each list, though there are some oddities on some of the lists. Each list also follows a theme. Some examples are Fire Lore, spells which deal with heat. Item Lore, spells that deal with identifying and evaluating the properties of things that the party might find. Or Moving Ways, spells that aid movement in a variety of difficult terrain types. Looking closely at the Fire Lore list as an example, it is an essence spell list available only to mages. At level 1, the spell is Boil Liquid, a small amount of liquid. At level 3, the caster gets Wood Fires, which does as the name suggests. Wall of Fire comes in at level 4, Firebolt is at level 6, and Fireball at level 8. Using the PowerPoint system, Boil Liquid would require the use of 1 PowerPoint, but a Mighty Fireball will cost the caster 8 PowerPoints. But look at this list. Look how short the descriptions of those spells are. And some of them are rather vague. For me, though, that's a feature rather than a bug, because it leaves things more open to the imagination. I heard a description from a player that they'd used the Ice Lore list, which has freeze water, to cause a lock to crack. Because, of course, you pour water in a lock, turn the water into ice, ice expands. That's a good use of that sort of spell. Next to each spell is a category. Looking again at the Fire Lore list, you'll see the letters E and F in their descriptions, and these are short for Elemental and Force. Other spells are classified as passive, utility and informational, and these should be pretty self-explanatory. Now this list, this Fire Lore list, is from the 1986 revised 1st edition rulebook. The 2nd edition of the rules, you'll see that black hardback book behind me, added a new stat called Risk Factor, which was the chance that a caster might be seen casting a spell. Now that doesn't mean seen by those standing nearby. It means by certain entities, sensed by certain dark entities that tend to dwell deep in Mirkwood or Mordor, and thus spellcasting brings an inherent risk of unwanted attention. Spellcasting in MERP also takes time. Well, it does if the caster wants the spell to work, because if a spell is cast, there is a bonus or penalty applied to the casting roll. If a spell is cast in combat, it depends on the number of rounds of combat that have been used to prepare the spell that the spellcaster has undertaken. So, the combat might start, and 4 rounds into combat, the caster might finally decide to loose the spell, thus trying to maximise the spellcasting potential. Thus, in combat, spells are used rather sparingly. Also, as with weapons, spellcasting can be fumbled. Most fumbles just result in the loss of power points, or a short period of confusion, but there are some extreme results on the spellcasting fumble table. Spell reversals, temporary loss of spellcasting ability, unconsciousness, and even physical paralysis. So spellcasting can be a risky business, and the life of a low-level caster can be short. Their spells are weak, they carry risk, and gaining of levels is somewhat slow. Okay, so that's the basic outline of how it all works. Now to address the criticisms and to give some opinions of my own. Now, criticism number 1. MERP uses the Rolemaster system, which doesn't feel much like Tolkien. PowerPoint's spell lists. Yes, this is a valid complaint, but there are very few pure mages in the Lord of the Rings to draw information from, certainly not mortal ones. Gandalf's magic is rarely flashy. Much of his power is only hinted at. But he, of course, was no mortal man. The spell list and PowerPoint system is an 80s game mechanic. It's designed to incorporate elements of fantasy role-playing games that are expected by gamers, and to have a degree of appeal beyond merely the Tolkien purist. Criticism 2. There's too much magic in MERP. Supplementary material for the game, i.e. adventures and campaign modules, do contain rather a lot of NPC mages, bards and animists, commonly as enemies for the party. So yes, it does give the impression of magic being a little too prevalent in the game world. Of course, this can be changed by the DM. You don't have to have all of these enemies in a module. If you're running it, you can change them. In terms of party spellcasters, though, in my experience, players tend to pick warriors, rangers, scouts and bards, usually in that order, more often than they choose to play animists and mages, also in that order. With scouts and warriors rarely, if ever, utilising magic, and rangers and bards gathering their magic skills very slowly, I haven't seen much spell use by PCs in my own games. Very few players have chosen the major spellcasting classes to play. Now add to this the fact that the ranger and bard spell lists are very nicely thematic. Spells that help with hiding, divination, tracking, calming effects and the like. And these can be described as a bard playing a soothing tune, or a ranger focusing deeply on his environment, something Aragorn was seen to do on occasion. Thus, while mechanically the character is casting a spell, in terms of the game world, it can be described differently. Animist spells lean heavily towards healing, life preservation, purifications, herbs, and animals. And again, the mechanism of spellcasting in these cases can be described in such a way as for it to not feel too magical. Mages are the issue, with shock bolts, walls of fire, stun clouds and teleportation. They're some of the higher level options. But as I said, just a few minutes ago, I rarely see mages chosen as PCs, because it takes a while to reach level 2, and players want to do more than boil some water, cause a bit of condensation, or tie a rope once or maybe twice a day. I do need to mention magic items, and this is where MERP is guilty. The game makes it very easy to get magical items, both in adventures and as starting heirlooms for the PCs. Some of the treasure caches in even low-level adventures contain excessive amounts of magic. Both items that can cast spells from certain lists multiple times per day, and items that provide magical modifiers, and so on. But a GM can tone those down. And in my game, if a player wants to spend a background point on a special sword, for example, yes, I know the item table does say a +10 or +15 magical weapon. But a player in my game won't get a magical +10 sword. It'll be a 200-year-old dwarf-made +10 sword with the bonus coming from the craftsmanship. Likewise, a cloak that gives +10 to hiding does not need to be magical. It can just be of very fine elven manufacture with beautiful leaf patterned cloth that naturally blends in with foliage, and so on. So in summary, yes, the critics do have some valid points, but they're not the end of the world, and any GM has it in them to easily tone down the feel of magic in their game world. Unless, of course, the players are daft and create a party entirely composed of mages, which would be a short game because 1 cubic foot of boiling water is unlikely to deter a band of rampaging orcs. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this video. I've been the Old Geek. Till next time, see ya.